This drives me nuts. It's not going to happen.
I was talking to a couple of brands and they're like letting people go because
On the front page of the major newspapers in America in the 1860s. AI is not new. It's using AI is not really market research. Yeah, maybe you don't need the human behaviour so much. Or I will say to each other after we finish recording,
where down the line innovation is actually taking place.
look, innovation happens every single day. In the 1940s, there was a German lady. Things do advance all the time.
One of the biggest misconceptions around consumer behavior that you've seen,
And they're very different things. Single change is what you've just said, the biggest mistake. The problem with the industry is I'm Australian, you're Indian. She made the fatal mistake. She made her father. You have multiple personas. That was true when I was 20. By the way, that was true when your grandfather was 20. Sitting there listening, I just, mate, sorry, there is no Generation X in China. A pop song written in the last 80 years.
then that's basically a controversial thing because
What you call secondary research is actually the primary research. Basically, I was paid to be Google. Here might be offensive to Hindus versus Muslims. They don't drink Coke because of the taste. People will fool themselves to death.
it will definitely change, probably change in the next couple of years itself.
Probably next week. I'm a born liar, you're a born liar.
Market research didn't begin with a dashboard, AI models or automation. It began with measurement. Over time, it evolved into insights. But today, many of us in the industry are quietly asking a deeper question. So if market research began as a measurement and evolved into insights, are we now entering the age of meaning? Welcome to the Collaborative Canvas, and my guest today is Dave McCollum. Dave represents a rare breed in our industry, someone who has been seen cycles, not just trends, someone who has shaped thinking rather than reacted to it. And over 3 decades, he has worked across strategy, media, culture, and consumer understanding, including senior leadership roles at McCann Word Group, and as a long-time contributor to the global research community. And it feels almost poetic that we are having this conversation in Bangkok, because Asia has never just followed the global change. It has previewed it. From shifting media landscape to aging populations, from rapid technology adoptions to cultural reinvention, this region often shown us what's coming before it becomes obvious elsewhere. So today's conversation isn't about chasing what's new. It's about understanding what actually matters. We'll talk about how consumer understanding has changed, what AI really means for research, why storytelling and narratives matter more than ever, and how researchers need to evolve. So not just in tools, but in mindset as well. So welcome, Dave.
Nice to meet you.
I saw your story a bit, how Dave came to Bangkok for 30 years ago, and it's been like 3 decades for you. And you mentioned that, how you never sure the first job could have been an ad agency and you would step into the market research world.
Yeah.
And similarly, I think there are so many stories for most of those people that they have been there. But one thing which I also realized that over a period of time, we've seen a drastic shift in the market research world, advertising world, marketing world.
Yeah.
And now since last 2 days that we focused on AI delivered presentation. So before we start on actual questions, I wanted to take your thoughts on how do you see, for the audience specifically, the 2026 should be. Because AI is already there and all these 3 industries are impacting some way or the other. I was talking to a couple of brands and they're like letting people go because they're not efficient enough to run AI.
Yeah.
And half of the AI is actually, helping them get the work done. So how do you see, because you've seen 3 decades of the shift, you know exactly how penetrated the market is and it's further penetrating.
Yeah, I actually started working for an ad agency in Australia 40 years ago. So it's four decades.
4
right?
decades.
And so in 4 decades, you see a lot of new tech. Now, things that, because you're considerably younger than me, that you take for granted, there was a time when I was going, wow, that's amazing, right? Things like going into a room in a building on the other side of the city so you could have a video conference with somebody in New York, right? That was an amazing thing the first time I ever did it. Now we just pick up our laptop or our phone and think nothing of it, right? I think the problem with all of this at the moment is that with every time there's a major new technology, people think that's the new defining technology and there will be never anything like it before. And I always remember an experience I had in the very late 90s. I came across a book called The Victorian Internet. And the Victorian Internet was written by an American journalist who had been doing some homework to write a story about something completely different. He'd gone to the New York City Library, one of the biggest public libraries in the world, and he was literally looking at the old copies of 100-year-old newspapers. But what he kept on coming across was certain headlines on the front page of the major newspapers in America in the 1860s. Now, what was interesting to him was that when he looked at the exact same newspapers, in some cases, in the 1990s, the front pages were exactly the same headlines. Talking about the internet. But what was those ones in the 1860s talking about? They were talking about the telegraph, the electric telegraph.
Exactly, yes.
And they were actually saying exactly the same things about the world will never be the same if you don't get into if your business doesn't take advantage of telegraph, you won't survive, right? All these headlines that we saw in the 90s about the internet, and of course we've seen in the last 3 years about AI, right? And a lot of other tech in between. So the first thing I always tell people is, look, stop panicking. First of all, I'm amazed. When I left my corporate job just over 10 and a half years ago, the first solo consultancy project I did involved using an AI market research platform to do market research for a major Japanese corporation in 4 different countries. And I've been using those AI platforms for 10 years. So when people start in the last 3 years going to conferences and talking about AI, I go, you're out of date. It's been around. And all of those platforms I use were already old when I was using them. Like somebody yesterday at the conference gave a talk about using AI and how to do using AI generated moderators. I reminded him, do you know when the first AI generated moderator was used in market research?
When?
1988.
1988.
1988. You don't know who Max Headroom was, right?
Of course.
He was an animated character developed by MTV, which then Coca-Cola bought the rights to use in advertising. And they created, with the help of some scientists, an AI-driven moderation system where this animated character would interview you, right? Now, the computer they were using it on was the size of this room.
Of course.
Okay. But AI is not new. AI, as you think about it, is new only because some people made available free packages that you could download onto your computer. But everybody thinks, oh, it's this brand new thing. No, it's most of the marketplace in market research, advertising, marketing have just been too lazy. For example, we've just spent 2 days at the IX APAC conference. They're good conferences. I've been to about 12 of their conferences around the world over the last 10 years. The first 4 times I went to different IX conferences, I talked about case studies of using AI for market research projects. And every single time, people sat there in the audience went, oh, that's good. And as I walked off the stage, I'd hear the same comments. Yeah, it's sort of interesting, but it's using AI is not really market research, right?
That's still the same.
Well, in some ways, we're still seeing that. We are. But the thing is that what the 3 industries you're talking about that are interconnected, yes, we're seeing, of course, it's a way to cut costs. It's a way to speed. The first reaction to all tech is, how does it help me cut costs and how does it make things faster? And it doesn't matter what the tech is. That's the first reaction to new tech. You know, when they invented the motor car, it was how you could get to one place to another faster than a single horse and save costs versus having to hire horses, right? Well, that's okay. But then both the techs that survive and the companies that survive using tech have to learn how to integrate it with human behavior and not totally replace human behavior. And if you think about it, if you were running a furniture factory, yeah, maybe you don't need the human behavior so much, right? But if you're running anything to do with marketing, by definition, you've got to be following what people are doing and what matters to people. And doing that, you can make some efficiencies through technologies to understand that. But realistically, and for a good example, before we started recording our discussion, you prefer to do these things live rather than do them via Zoom or another automated system, right? And there's a good reason for that, because the vibe in the room is just better.
Yeah.
There's something, whether it's in the pre-conversation or something you or I will say to each other after we finish recording, that'll be more memorable than, unfortunately, what I say for this recording, right? And that's where the industry has to get its head around that. Automated surveys, automated AI panels, all this sort of stuff is great, but you've got to integrate smart human beings who have empathy and understand the way people think and act to fine-tune what you're doing constantly.
And since you cited that furniture example, the first memory that I got of I don't remember, probably a YouTube short or an Instagram reel or a TikTok I saw. It was about how people are innovating in terms of delivering a furniture to a human being at their house. So I think somewhere down the line, innovation is actually taking place. Even in the logistical department, they've wrapped up in such a way that you just open it up and it gets settled down.
Innovation happens every single day, right? And innovation in market research, for example. Look, in the 1940s, there was a German lady moved from Austria to the US, got a job at my old agency, McCann Erickson, and she was the first person to master the art of focus groups as we know now.
Yeah.
That was innovation. That was a different way of doing market research. 10 years later, that same ad agency was the first commercial entity to take on board eye tracking as a norm in terms of doing research. Well, now we think of eye tracking as really old style research, right? Mm-hmm. But of course, in today's world, you can have AI platforms that will automate the eye tracking across millions of computers all at one time. So you can see how everybody watching a particular YouTube download is eye tracking, right? So it's advanced, and things do advance all the time. And we just have to learn how to both build that into our business, but also build that into the way in which we re-understand things and re-understand the way people work.
And one of the biggest misconceptions around consumer behavior that you've seen, through the decades and through different companies that you've worked with, there has been one misunderstood change in how consumer are meaning today. What do you think that missed?
Yeah, the biggest single change is what you've just said. The biggest mistake. You keep on saying consumer behavior. People in marketing, market research, advertising over the last 30 years have more and more used the word consumer instead of people. And they're very different things. So they generalize consumer, and politicians now do this. If you listen to governments anywhere in the world, your finance minister in any country will talk, well, consumers are demanding lower inflation. No, people are demanding lower inflation. The problem with the industry is we've
generalizing it.
We dehumanized it.
Okay.
So when you say the word consumer, and I always give the example, I'm famous as a Coca-Cola drinker, right?
Yeah. So
I genuinely, folks, in May this year, it will be 55 years that I've drunk at least one can of Coke every single day, right? Am I a Coke consumer?
Yes.
No, there's no Coke in this room. I am not drinking it. You're only a Coke consumer when you're actually drinking it. The rest of the time, you're a human being who may become a Coke consumer or was a Coke consumer. You're only a consumer when you're actually using the product. The rest of the time, you're a human. So, for example, Ankesh, let's face it, you use lots and lots of things. You drink lots of things. You'll have different products you reuse, whatever. But 99.9% of the time, you're not the consumer of that product. You're Ankesh, the human being who does this, this, and this. There's a tiny fraction of your life when you're a consumer. And the problem with the industry is that we take on board these stupid terms and generalize them and take away from what really matters. Market researchers are not here to really understand how you decide on your favorite brand of shoes. They're really here to understand you, what's important in your life. The most important phrase that any market researcher has to keep in mind is their job is to find out what matters to people and then apply that to why they would buy that shoe or drink a can of Coke. People not consumers. That should be everybody's mantra.
So now I have another fundamental question. I need some clarity around it. People versus consumer versus personas.
Okay. Personas, interestingly enough, another great innovation was there's a guy in America still alive called Dr. Joe Plummer. Most people in the industry now don't know that Dr. Joe Plummer invented the persona. He worked for FCB, Fort Conan Building, in the 1960s in America, at big ad agency then. He's a trained market researcher, famous, but he was the resident market researcher at their main office in the States, and he came up with the concept of personas. Fortunately for me, about 25 years ago, he worked for the same company for me, and he became a sort of mentor of mine for a few years. Now, what was interesting is that even then, when he was brought into the company I was working for, we went through the process of personas. And for, since he invented them for 40 years, you could go into any ad agency in the world, and no matter what kind of market research you delivered to us, or their own in-house market research team delivered, now, how do we turn that into personas? Now, the problem was that if you look at all those sorts of studies, usually what comes out is like 4 or 6, and at most maybe 8 personas, right?
Yeah.
And every time you use those, what I found interesting was, so let's say we did a study, and when, you and I were both in the study, and there were 2,000 respondents, and they made 6 personas, and it comes out that there's a persona that you would be slotted into, and there's a persona I'd be slotted into. Now, it might be different because I'm obviously a lot older than you, or I'm Australian, or Indian, or whatever, right? But here's the problem I always kept on finding was nobody was one persona. So we would artificially define 6% of the population is this persona, 15% is that persona, 22% is that persona.
Exactly.
Right? But when we actually talk to real people, they usually were made up of parts of 3 or 4 of those personas, right? And on different days and different occasions. And here's the big thing.
You're saying that there is always a level of overlapping between...
The problem with personas is that it defines it, it says, look, here's the population, there's 6 types of people, here's 11% of them are this type, 12% of that type, but nobody actually fits 100% into one of those personas. And what we found I found really interesting was when Facebook really became popular. Facebook and its core competitors in the early days really became popular because it became more obvious. It was harder and harder and harder to say personas worked. And I'll give you the classic example I always tell people. My daughter, who's now in her 30s, lives in Australia, right? When Facebook first became popular, she got herself an account. She was I don't know what she was, 14 or something like that. Right? Great. She made the fatal mistake. She made her father her third friend. And to this day, I'm still on her Facebook. So I see whatever she posts on Facebook, right? Now, these days, as is common with a lot of people her generation, she doesn't use Facebook much anymore, but she uses other stuff. But what was interesting was 2 or 3 years later, when she was 17, we were living in Tokyo. She graduates high school and decides to go to Australia to go to university. No problem. She goes down, she goes to university, gets a couple of degrees, all good. But what was really interesting was the shift. The shift happened that when she first went down there, watching her, and every now a couple of weeks I just watch her post on Facebook, and you find out she's having a good time, right? So there was a part of her that was a persona as a hardworking university student trying to get an advanced degree in linguistics. And there was a part of her that was a different personality, a different profile, which was party hard, right? Now, what was then a big shift was, not long before she graduated, suddenly her Facebook page, she changed persona on the page. She became more serious. She became more about, I'm going to more, reporting, not partying hard.
You're actually taking me here to the concept that you've invented called life stages.
Yes.
That's exactly the same thing.
Yes, because, there's 2 things. First of all, the persona thing, despite my continued friendship with the guy that invented it, right? He's obviously a much older man now, but is that the problem with personas is it's a very limited way to look at people because nobody's a single persona. You have multiple personas.
Yeah.
I'll guarantee your social media persona is different from your real life persona.
Exactly.
Right? Sometimes we have different personas with different groups of friends, right? The group of friends where I'm the mad Spurs fan that talks not only about football, other personas where I'm the dedicated, industry guy or whatever, right? Yeah. Professional guy. The other big factor with all that is that the other big example of that where the industry takes a concept and then lazily thinks about it is the Generation XYZ thing. So I don't know, have you ever read Generation X, the book?
No.
Okay. Did you know about the book?
No.
Okay.
I only know the generations that we always talk about.
No, well, that started with a novel called Generation X.
Oh.
Generation X was written, I think it was 1990.
For me, those are again personas.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. Generation X, the term did not exist before 1990. Okay.
Yeah, that's
right. Nobody talks about baby boomers as a marketplace, really.
But isn't it because of the internet?
No. What happened in 1990? This American novelist writes a novel. It's called Generation X. The storyline briefly is it's 3 very young 20-year-old people who come from different parts of the States, end up in very low-ending jobs like cleaners, working McDonald's in Las Vegas. They share a house and basically they live their pretty shitty life. Okay? What happened was the book became a big hit. It became literally a number 1 hit on the book lists in America. Mm-hmm. Got read all over the world. Just happened a year after the book was published, I was invited to speak at a conference in the States, and lo and behold, the main keynote speaker was that author. And I was invited to have lunch with him with a couple of other people.
Oh, wow.
So we're sitting there, and this guy was one of the hottest authors in the world at the time, right? And somebody says, must be great that your novel's such a success. And he jokingly said, well, nobody remembers the 6 novels I wrote that were a total failure, And then somebody else said, you must be really happy with the way in which the business world, marketing and other business, has taken on the concept of Generation X from your novel and used it to apply to market research, etc., the way to frame businesses. And he turned around, I'm not too sure they actually read the novel because that's not what it's about. His novel was about the idea that, yes, it was set in 1990, but it was actually about the idea that literally in every generation of young people, there's a small minority that are just dropout losers. That was true when I was 20. That was true when you were 20. Yeah. That was true when my daughter was 20. By the way, that was true when your grandfather was 20, right? And that's what he defined as Generation X. But the marketing world got lazy. And I'll tell you the honest truth.
Now I'm
exactly 2 weeks after that lunch, I'm in Hong Kong. And I'm there to be briefed because Coca-Cola wanted to run a new campaign across Greater China. And we're getting briefed by the head of marketing for Asia, a fellow Aussie that I'd actually known since he was a schoolboy. And he's standing up the front and he's talking about, so the objectives of this campaign is this, this, and this, and we're going to do this, and the ad agency's here, the media agency, the PR agency, we're all sitting there writing notes and stuff in this. Now, the target is Generation X. And I'm sitting there listening. I just, mate, sorry, there is no Generation X in China. And he goes, yes, there is. It's the generation born between this year and this year.
Oh.
And I went, no, that doesn't exist. It's a myth. And he said, no, Dave, you obviously don't understand what we're talking about. You should go and do your homework. I was literally had lunch with the guy that invented the term 2 weeks ago, right? Now, this is the laziness of the market research, advertising, marketing industry. Because ever since then, we turned it into Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. The truth is that the differences between generations is marginal at best. Of course, there are some tactical differences because technology develops. The way you listen to music, for example, will have developed. We saw a great presentation yesterday from somebody from Spotify, right?
Yeah.
Okay. When I grew up, it was LPs and then the amazing invention of cassettes, right? Whatever you listened to when you were young.
My life started with cassettes.
Cassettes, right? But here's the thing I find interesting. I always point out to people, if you go back in any country of the world over the last 60, 70 years, and you find out what was the number one song every year for people around between 17 and 25, okay? Mm. What was the number one song when you were growing up or when I was growing up, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't remember now.
Doesn't matter what the song is, doesn't matter what the language is, doesn't matter what the band was or the singer was, only two themes to those songs. Every single song that's been a number one hit is only one of two themes. I'm trying to find love or I want to be different. That's the whole thing. Pop music never changes. The way you listen to it, yes, sometimes now it's like I've got to listen to Pink Black, right? In my days, it was AC/DC, right? And whoever it was when you were growing up. Who sings it, the way they sing it, the way it's recorded and replayed is a technological difference, but the theme doesn't change. And if you look at all life stages, things don't change. They don't change much at all. And what we should do there as marketers, market researchers, focus on that, not on the whimsical tiny differences between young people today or mothers today versus mothers 30 years ago, or the concerns of retirees now versus retirees 30 years ago. Because actually, I mean, I've been studying retiree and later life, what I call new life builders, people 55 to 75. I've been doing in-depth studies for 30 years on that. And I can tell you, there's no difference between 30 years ago and now. And there was no difference when you look historically at research from 50 years before that.
Dave, you've been known for telling a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And
go on.
And that's what we have been just hearing right now. You know, the term doesn't change, whether it is the age of me being at 30 or you being in your age at 30.
Yeah.
At what point you realize that these stories and not statistics, because even now I am also hearing that, you know, you're talking about numbers any which ways. You're talking about how things change, what terms remains the core strength at that point of time. Drive real understanding and why researchers don't consider them. I mean, they're still resisting that shift. They're not taking it up. Because even I understand, I mean, Gen X, I realized that, you know, they have segregated basis on who knows what in terms of the internet era. And that's why Gen X, Y, now we call it Alpha, you know, millennials, we have been defined those ways. But now I'm kind of curious to know more about as to how, you know, the 20-year-old using that same term. Even if, you know, you talked about the music industry. I remember, you know, I used to record a lot of cassettes because I love only those songs which I really wanted to hear more and more.
Of course.
But the things changed to CD. I recorded CDs.
But by the way, and now it's Spotify. And what do? You put collections on Spotify of the music that appeals to you, right? And that's true everywhere, right? And so
is that the term that my choices remains the same?
Yeah.
Those two themes on which
every pop song written in the last 80 years since Bing Crosby, right, has been those two themes.
Now, so why researchers are looking at a different?
Because, well, first of all, you've got to remember, what are researchers paid to do? When I get up at conferences or I talk to clients or I talk to researchers and I tell them all this, of course, there's the scare factor. Because if you say, look, life stages don't really change. Yes, you do need to do a little bit of investigation.
Then that's basically a controversial thing, because if you're really there to invest the budget that has been allocated for a research and researchers are scared to do a research which is not even required, then it is not required. Then.
Well, most market research in terms of qual and quant is not required.
Exactly.
It never has been. Okay, because remember this. I started off I was a public librarian, right? That's my first degree. I'm a librarian by training. I got hired into an ad agency with the corporate librarian. I'd never heard of the term secondary research until I joined an advertising agency.
I learned that in my university days. There's primary research, there's secondary research.
Well, my argument has always been, no, you've got it the wrong way around. What you call secondary research is actually the primary research. Because you do it first.
Kind of, yes.
Right? No, you do it first. The other thing is, most companies, I've very quickly discovered, most companies don't do proper primary research. The classic example is literally hundreds of times that I've been involved with projects where a client will say, we need to do a new piece of research on why pot plants are nice to have on tables. And you sit there and you go, okay. And then literally you find out that in the previous 10 years, they've done different departments of the same company have done 5 different pieces of research on exactly the same thing, right? So they haven't done what we call secondary research first. They haven't looked at what they already know. They haven't done proper desk research to find out what is already published. And usually if you do that, most of the need for qual and quant research disappears because it's already there.
So do you think these LLMs are the secondary research elements?
Oh, they're fantastic. You know, the LLMs I've been using for the last 10 years, classically, the one I most use, for example, work very simply. You identified which country you were interested in. You identified which language in that country. Let's say Hindi in India.
Mm.
And I want to find out about the shoe market in India in the Hindi-speaking population. So I then type in a bunch of key terms about that business, and it goes off and it finds everything that's ever been read on the internet in India in that language that mention those terms. And then it reads the whole lot and it analyzes the whole lot and tells you the importance of each of those terms, where they rank in importance, what emotions are carried by those things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, that was the work I was doing when I first joined McCann 40 years ago by going to public libraries and finding out printed magazines. That's what I was paid to do, except now you can do it on LLM in a day and you can hit 5 billion pieces of content to find out, right?
And I'm actually imagining you being in a public library is equivalent to a movie where we see, you know, people go into the libraries. And
well, I always joke. I've been joking for decades now that when I worked in a public library, a lot of the time I was the guy that would, let's say when you were at school, right, or university or high school or something, and you'd go to the library and you'd say, I'm doing the course, I'm doing a biology course, and the homework is I've got to do something about what's this thing, photosynthesis, that happens in plants, right? And you probably had to do that at some point in junior high school or something, right? Well, you'd be amazed in public libraries, at least in Australia, how many young guys like you at whatever it was, 13, 14, would come up to the front desk and say, I've got a homework assignment about what is photosynthesis and how it works. Okay, and I'd tell you the Dewey Decibel number for the books to read, and they'd stand there looking at me until I told them the answer. And so basically I was paid to be Google. I was paid to be Google for decades. Right? When I went to work in a big global ad agency, I was the guy. So I started off answering the local officers' questions in Australia, but over the next couple of years, I became the guy that anybody in the world in our system or our clients around the world, Coke, L'Oreal, MasterCard, John Mo's, if they needed something about Australia, ask Dave. And then I got shifted to Asia. And the chairman unfortunately he died just last month, but the chairman of McCann, when I first moved to Asia for the next 10 years, knew me, met me many times, never used my name. He just said, call Mr. Asia. So any client, they had a question about Asia and they didn't want to see research reports. They literally, on the end of a phone call or at a meeting, so Dave, can you explain why the religious differences in different parts of India mean that we can't run this ad everywhere, or why what we said here might be offensive to Hindus versus Muslims? Okay, well, and I'd have to rattle off an answer, right? So I had to be incredibly well read because most people in marketing and advertising are just intellectually lazy people.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's not Dave McCoggan, it's Dave GPT.
Thank you very much. And by the way, the shares are on sale right now.
I mean, digging a little more into the depth of the LLMs, the AI and machine learning have already been taking its own shape in these days.
Yeah.
And most of the work that people, do, I mean, as I was talking to somebody yesterday and they wanted to start a new business in India. They wanted to find out whether shapewears is a trending thing or not.
Whether what, sorry?
Shapewears.
I am.
So I know I've been meeting a lot of D2C customers and clients, and they generally do their own research. They find out a workflow as to how they wanted to set things up. And shapewear has lately been come up with many people, because I think somewhere down the line people are more health conscious. They really wanted to be in the shape.
Sure.
So from the work,
not me obviously, but
of course neither me. I don't think so. But from your work with narrative systems, you always talk about stories, and what should researchers stop immediately doing things, and what should they double down on rather doing not things?
jump into statistics and starting more watching.
So I think I'll go with the second one. Study more watching.
Watching. When so I have some, obviously some friends in the market research world, I'm sure you do, who are semioticians. Right? And when I was first introduced to semiotics decades ago, in all my years as a student, going to university, getting a couple of degrees, this was all brand new to me. Right? Now I found out
it's brand new for me these days because now I'm actually learning it about.
It's actually an 80-year-old discipline.
That's
right?
what I'm learning right now.
Right. But I was blown away. The most impressive, what we call primary research technique that I can imagine is semiotics. It's and the most powerful and the most useful. I'm extremely doubtful about asking people questions. I'm a born liar. You're a born liar. I'll give you an example. You know that if you get sent a request to be a part of a survey on your computer, the first or second question will be, do you work in the market research, advertising or marketing industry? And if you say yes, sorry, we don't need you.
Exactly.
So I lie every time.
So do I.
And I've done that for 40 years and I've done thousands of surveys where I've just lied about who I am and what I do, right? Now I do that for professional reasons not because I want to trick the system, because I want to see what other people's surveys are like, how they structure them, whatever they do. But we all lie about stuff, right? We're all driven to give answers that if you ask me a direct question, I feel like I'm going to give you a direct answer, but it may not be the answer I want to give you. It might not be. And this is, for example, why polling techniques are always questioned, right? Like, are you going to vote for Trump? Depends on where you're asking them. Who's listening, right? Or, are you videoing this, or is it just a blind answer, right? But think about that in terms of, the great, this last week, there's been a big controversy about the new Pepsi ad using a polar bear, right? And the polar bear character does a taste test, but blind taste test between Coke and Pepsi, and rejects the Coke, right? So that is basically just them renewing the same campaign they've been using since the late 60s, the taste test, right? But here's the thing. We know the taste test, I'm not doubting that taste test original campaign, that when they asked a bunch of Americans to blind taste test Coke versus Pepsi, and it turned out that there was a minor number more that preferred the Coke taste, even though they were declared Coke drinkers, right? That's probably true. We know that at best, maybe 5% of the population can actually tell the difference between the taste of the two, right? But here's the thing. People don't drink Coke because of the taste. I have not drunk Coke every day for 55 years because of the taste. I've drunk it for a whole bunch of things. I've drunk it because in my heart and in my soul, it connects with happiness. It's since I was 15, it's been, if you like, the number one thing in my life that I can rely upon to always make me feel good. Not necessarily because I love the taste, but because of the whole imagery, the feel of it.
Can I say that, is it not the addiction of the taste, but the addiction of how you feel about Coke?
Yes, it's the addiction of the feeling. Now, when I've, for example, done a lot of research in the motor industry.
And sorry, one other thing. The feel and the way you see Coke, or is it more of color that Coke uses, as in red and white?
All of it. The curve, the color of the can, the bottle shape.
So, which means if you see the similar thing in other product, would you dilute yourself?
No.
Why?
Because you've got to have the package. It's the whole package of things, right? So if it was just the taste, I might change. But it's not the taste. And the problem is that too much research is trying to find that one little thing instead of looking at the whole package. As I said, if you do a lot of work in the selling, coming up with advertising and marketing motor vehicles, for example, people will fool themselves to death and lie to themselves and others to death to prove the point that, well, I drive an X branded car because it's the best car. Now, what was interesting was in the late 1990s, I was doing a piece of work. I won't say which car brand, but a big car brand thing, which involved me going and interviewing about 20 of the most successful car salesmen in Australia, in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, the big three cities, right? One-on-one, just discussion, not really interviews, just go and visit them, ask them about their business. Some were selling the brand I was doing it for. Some sold other brands, right? I was upfront about that. It's just like, tell me about what the story is selling cars. Right? And they taught me two things, two valuable lessons. One was that most people, as in basically everybody, has no idea how a car really works.
Yeah.
And one of them actually mentioned that one of the big three car brands in America at that time in the late 90s had interviewed something like 15,000 car mechanics across America, and only 3% of them could actually explain how the traditional motor engine actually made the car move. They could fix it, but they couldn't explain what it actually did. And that's the mechanics, not the buyers,
exactly.
Right? The other thing that he taught me was, which was great, and now I can understand it, was he said to me, so Dave, and I guess at the time I was like in my mid-late 30s, right? And this guy says to me, Dave, bought a new car lately? I said, well, actually, about 6 months ago, we bought a new car for my wife. Oh, yeah, what'd you buy? I told him what we bought, and he goes, oh, yeah, it's fine. What'd you pay for it? Oh, yeah, it's a bit of a shit car, but you got a good price, so, it's all right. I said, oh, because, if you walked any dealership in Australia, any car dealership in Australia, nobody gives a shit what you buy. Nobody cares about you. Now, I'm a white-collar, middle management guy from an ad agency. Naturally, I have a big head because I work in advertising, da-da-da. So, what do you mean? And he goes, look, the only people we really care about is, how old's your dad? And I said, well, and my dad was 40 years older than me, so I know he's too old. He said, look, if your dad was 60 and he walked in the dealership today, we'd be pushing each other out of the way to get to him. I said, really? He goes, yeah, the only people that we really care are like 55 to 70. They're the only customers that we really care about. Why? He said, because a man walks in that age group, it's probably the first car in his whole adult life that he's bought for himself, where he can buy the car he always wanted. And guess what? The car you buy, Dave, our margin is this. The car he buys, our margin is that, right? So that taught me a lot about the way we should think about our target markets and who's really important. It's like the myth of we must get them young, right? Well, we all know from tons and tons of research that there is no proof that if you get somebody who buys stuff young, they'll stay loyal. There's no proof at all to that. And the other thing is they have no money, so they're always going to buy the cheap versions. So target people 50 plus. That's where the money is. For any category of product you can name, the market you should target is 50 plus.
But I think there's a small emotional story to it that, the father has never bought the car, so it would be his first car. But
No. He meant any motor driver. He said literally any man that walks in. He might have owned great cars. He might have owned great cars. But when he gets to 60, he'll buy the car he really wanted. Because what's happening, as he explained, most men, and this sounds all sexist and everything, he said, look, most men, when they go to he gave another example. Said, when you go to buy a car, so guys will come in here, and they might come in 2 or 3 Sundays in a row, because most people go visit car dealerships on the weekends, right? He might come in 2-3 weekends in a row. Maybe Brent comes in with a friend of his. Maybe he comes in with his son, does a test drive. And he says, but realistically, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter until he brings his wife, because she has to approve it.
That's so true. So the target audience is his wife.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things we identified years ago for one of the big global car brands was that 10% of all decisions is if you have a son between the age of 6 and 15, 10% of the decision is that kid's. Because there's nothing worse than a father driving up in his brand new car from the dealership and his son looks out the window or he's in the front garden or whatever and looks up, oh, here comes that. Oh, shit, look at the car. Oh, damn, you bought that? There's nothing worse for a father than his son's disappointment at his choice of a car.
I think I heard you on this context earlier, because somewhere I'm feeling that deja vu kind of a thing and getting nostalgic about.
In other words,
I
talk too much. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. No, the fact is, I've heard this story before as well, or probably, not just that it's coming from you again, but somebody also tell me, when you sell something to a consumer or a customer, it is not for him eventually. It gets approved by 3 more or 4 more people within his family.
Well, this goes back to the laziness of when we use the word consumers. I mean, a lot of products that you're saying, well, our consumer, do you mean the person that buys it, the person that pays for it, the person that is the primary user of it, right? The person that has to give the approval of the purchase? Which one are you talking about? Because in nearly, most categories, it's the same. It's different.
Isn't that a difficult situation to find a target audience in that case?
Yeah, well, of course it is, but that's where you've got to do the homework and thinking it through and looking at history.
That never happens, but
no, but people need to do more of that. They need to do more history, right? The most important subject that you'll ever study in your life is history, not to learn the dates, but to learn the process and the way in which things happen in life. And for example, if you think about all sorts of products, in your heart from your own experience, if you think about it, that, look, we're going to sell toothbrushes, right? Now, realistically, who's the target for toothbrushes?
Everybody.
No, it's not everybody.
Why? Brushing?
Who buys toothbrushes?
Father.
No.
As in the head of the family?
No. Are you kidding? You go to any supermarket here in Bangkok or any city supermarket in India, in anywhere in the world, how many adult men do you see buying toothbrushes for a family? None.
I do it.
You do it. You're a freak. There's always an exception, right? No, it's women. Women buy toothbrushes. Now, I'll give, we always talk about the consumer and the life experience of the consumer and what they go through. So years ago, I was working for J&J was the client. I was asked to do some work. We did a bit of a study on toothbrushes. And one of the things we found was that if you said to people something, like, how often do you use a toothbrush? Once a day, twice a day, right? Most people once or twice a day. How often do you think about your toothbrush? Once a day, twice a day? No. We found out a normal family of, say, 2 parents and two children collectively spent 7 minutes a year thinking about a toothbrush. And nearly all of that was from the mother. Because you use the toothbrush, but you don't sit there thinking about the toothbrush.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Well, the 2 to 3 minutes you're supposed to use it every morning, there's not a second of that is put into thinking about your toothbrush. It's usually a chance to stare in the mirror and go, geez, I'm looking old, or something like that, right? The category itself, is a high interest category, but very, very low time spent thinking about it. But people don't do enough of that work to figure that out. And so they'll talk about toothbrush companies. We'll talk about our consumers. Who do you mean? Well, like everybody uses a toothbrush. That's not who buys it. You've got to talk to who buys it. Or you've got to talk to the person who controls the toothbrushing in the home. So again, I don't know about you. My father he brushed his teeth every day. I brush my teeth. My younger brother brushed my teeth. The only person in the world, in the house that had any control on the toothbrushing was our mother, right? Beating us over the head. You didn't brush it properly, right?
Yeah.
Beating my dad over the head. You're not brushing your teeth properly. It is what it is. You just got to, people don't put enough thought into this.
We've not even thought in those directions.
No.
Which is why the target audience. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're hearing this, you actually know what is you need to double down on it. But considering, Dave, there's a lot of literature which is already lying in the market. And, you've been to libraries to dig these information out. It is already there on the LLMs.
Yeah, but people don't use it.
Exactly. Right. So there is a fear that, AI will replace them. Well,
that's, again, I always like to give the example. You know who Socrates was, right? Famous Athenian philosopher, about 2,500 years ago. And Socrates, of course, is famous for a lot of very clever things that he said and that were then recorded by others. He didn't actually write books, but other people wrote, his students wrote his, what he said, and it got distributed. But one of the most interesting things I found that he said was, at about that time in Athens, girls did not go to school. So it was only young boys, the sons of citizens, that went to school. But they had private schools and public schools, right? And what happened around that same time when he was alive was they standardized the Greek alphabet at that point.
Greek alphabets.
Yes. So every kid going to school in Athens, every boy going to school in Athens was learning the same alphabet. And he said, this is a curse. This will destroy all imagination and thinking. Because if everybody learns the same thing and that learns to write in the same way, nobody will write in any original form.
Correct.
Right? Now go forward about 1800 years to say 1580. And if you were in England in 1580, just as we have spell check, right, or Grammarly on your laptop, right, when you put out something, maybe you use those. If you were writing plays, okay, there was no formal dictionary, but there was certain ways to construct sentences, certain ways to say things. There were certain words. And then along comes a young middle-aged guy who wrote the most successful plays in history. None of Shakespeare's plays that we know of would exist or would exist in any way near the form they did now if spellcheck or any of those software were available. Why? He invented 800 words, right? He invented whole new structures of the way to say things. He broke all the rules that he would have been taught at school in Stratford-upon-Avon about how to write. Okay? Now, he's considered the greatest writer in the English language in history. And if you follow it saying the same thought, at the same exact time, Cervantes was the greatest Spanish-speaking writer of all time.
Yeah.
At the same time. And guess what? His novel has been turned into endless movies and everything. Was a totally original idea of a novel. The way it was constructed, the way it was written, the language that was used, right? So here's the thing. LLMs will be like massive, bigger versions of libraries or databases or Google as we knew it only 5 years ago, etc. And they will aid you to find out more stuff quicker, speed and efficiency. It's up to you to figure out what you'll learn from it that will make a difference. Too many people, for example, and this is the big debate, in universities, right, is in education systems. Well, we've got to make sure our kids are not just downloading the answers from ChatGPT. No, that's fine. That's fine. Download the information.
We say every time.
Say it differently.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly I've been hearing in most of those conferences which talks about AI. They want ChatGPT to be there, but imagination is like it's being killed. They're actually downloading it in the information. Most of those LinkedIn posts that we see today, they're just a copy paste of what ChatGPT told them to write, right, rather than they articulating it.
And here's the thing, we hear a lot about this thing about prompting, right? So the one industry in the world that should be ahead of the game is the qualitative research industry.
That's exactly what I was telling yesterday.
Because they're the people that are paid, and they've been paid their whole lives to prompt. That's what a qual researcher does. He prompts. But they're not applying that to their AI usage. Right?
Exactly.
So they're using structured things, questions, and not prompting and reprompting and reprompting. The example I gave in a talk yesterday was there's a room of 200 market researchers. When I asked them all to pull out their phone, go to their favorite GPT or Perplexity, whatever their favorite platform is, and type in a prompt that says, tell me about Dave McCocken and what makes him different and unusual from other market researchers, not one person had ever done it before, which, as I said in the room, makes them pretty shit market researchers. Because the number one brand you should, of course, research is yourself and find out, what does the world think? How does it think? And then you find out the answers. You look at 3 or 4 different platforms to find out, well, gee, they say each one says something a little bit different, maybe majorly different, right? Maybe one of them will mention about you more about this podcast series. He's famous for doing this. Another one will say he was actually, well, he's really different because of this, right? Or whatever. Have you ever done the exercise of going to ChatGPT and asking them why you're different? Not who is, but why are you different?
I believe I've fed in so much of information that the different element it would.
No, but have you checked? I'm not saying you haven't fed it. Have you checked what it says? After we finish
I will.
You go look yourself up.
But I'll give you a context. Most of the times, when we used to fill certain forms, they always ask for a description. I don't want to use the same description again.
Good.
So I generally go back to ChatGPT. I feed that information, and then I ask them to articulate as much as they could. And then I paste it onto Word, and then I see whether it is saying the same thing, because I know myself. ChatGPT doesn't. Whatever information I've given it.
Well, that's my point is though. But here's the problem is, as I said again yesterday, was last year I got invited to talk to a bunch of headhunters. They were having a sort of conference, right? And it was about 30 of them in the room. Headhunters for all sorts of industries. And one of the things during the course of the day, I mean, I did a talk, but I sat through the day and listened to them talking about industry matters and trends and bullshit, But one of the things I heard was, nobody reads resumes anymore. Why would you read a resume? People just lie on their resumes all the time. Right? You only highlight the good shit, right? So what they do is they actually type into ChatGPT or one of the platforms, and they'll type in the question I just asked. They don't ask, who is Dave McCocken, right? That's too easy. They'll ask a more interesting prompt, like, what makes Dave McCocken unique and different, and what makes him really suitable for this job versus others, right? Prompts that a good qual researcher should think of straight away. But the interesting thing, and yesterday wasn't the first time, I've done this at different market research events now for over probably half a dozen in different countries over the last year. Nobody's ever done it. In the audience, nobody's ever checked themselves properly and then did what you just said, which was you go to 3 or 4 of the platforms to see the differences, and then you start feeding the platforms the information you want it to think about you, right? Whether it's published articles or your videos or whatever, reviews of yourself, whatever, or you go to people and say, hey, listen, can you write some stuff and can you ask that question about me? And then tell them, no, you're wrong, because I know he's really good at this. Now you could say that's cheating the system, but guess what? That's the way the world works, man. So what do we do when we do a market research on a brand? Well, we're then telling the client, if you're any good as a researcher, and it's interesting, I noticed in the last couple of days, and at a lot of conferences, you still hear at market research industry conferences, we must become more like consultants. I'm sorry, guys, you're 40 years too late. The good market researchers were doing that 40 years ago. And then they stopped being market researchers because they got promoted to senior jobs. I happen to know that because that's the only way I got to be a senior manager at a big global ad agency, right? Nobody thought of me as a market researcher for the last 20 years I was there. He's the head of strategy, right?
And this has been faster and, changing pretty fast. People are actually accommodating to what they're actually getting.
Yeah.
They're not applying their brain. So I think if you're really looking to risk your job and you're not analyzing what best you could do by yourself, I think you should hear this episode. It has so much of deepness into it. We in fact covered almost everything except about the real market research that we talk about. We talked about how different life stages work, how people think, there's so many stories. I mean, the storyteller is sitting right next to me, and he has not even just given me a glimpse of where the story ends. There's always another story that connects to the another part of the world. And that's again, the way things are changing these days, Dave. We have been looking at market research. If I say the time that you started and the time that I am looking at it, do you think that the speed at which it has been changing has quietly been diluted, or has the understanding been changed across? Because now everything is easy; people can do it.
But that's the fundamental thing. One of the, whether it's specifically the market research industry or the whole world, right? I heard when I was this morning, I was listening to a rugby league podcast from Australia. So I know most of the audience probably doesn't know what rugby league is. It's a different sport from rugby, right? The most popular sport in Sydney, and I grew up with it. So there's a podcast I listen to every Thursday morning. But the two guys on the podcast somehow distracted into technology, right, as related to the game, but then got into other technologies. And the younger one of the two guys, and one's like in his mid-20s, the other one's like nearly 40. It's not like my age, right? But the younger guy is just going, oh, of course, we'll never see technology change like we have in the last 10 years. And the older guy who's maybe late 30s is going, yeah, I'm pretty sure when I was your age, we said that about the previous 10 years. And that's my point, is that I would say that technology change hasn't got faster. It's been a progress for at least 100, 150 years. I mean, imagine...
I agree.
Imagine what it was like in the 1950s. So I was born at the end of the 1950s. And the technological impact of the 1950s, the concept of television, for example. We sometimes forget at the end of 1999, there was, as there were many of these things, but there was a global thing where somebody asked 10,000 scientists, what was the most important technological development of the 20th century? You know what the number one answer was?
Mm-hmm.
The washing machine.
Again, I've heard this story somewhere.
Because, maybe from me. But,
yes.
But I quote that all the time because people go, what do you mean the washing machine? What about nuclear power?
You said yesterday itself, right?
Not that one. But no, I didn't yesterday. But I'm pretty sure I did. Maybe. But
you talked about washing machine.
But the washing machine, most people did. What they said was, if you look, just strictly speaking, in the 20th century, it was the greatest labor-saving device in the world because for women, it reduced their workload by 20%.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Now, and they said the trouble is 99.999% of men would never have thought of that. Okay?
Agreed.
Because
True.
most men still couldn't figure out how to use a washing machine, right? So that put it, when I first heard that a number of years ago, that really put in context this. I've been lucky enough, I distinctly remember when television was first launched in Australia, right? Like totally life-changing sort of in-home entertainment, connectivity. I'm old enough to remember when people started putting telephones into when it became really common to have a telephone at home, right? The advantages of being old, right? That you can start to put things in perspective a little bit and say, yeah, of course, the speed today is amazing how things are changing. But we were saying that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to put in context. I mean, arguably, again, one scientific historical study has suggested which 50-year period, at least from a Western point of view, was the most dynamic period in the history of mankind in terms of change.
I think 90s, 1990, post 1990.
1450 to 1500.
14, I can't go that back.
The printing press was invented.
Printing?
Before
1400.
Late in mid 1400s, the printing press was invented. Before that, in the first 50 years of the printing press, between 1450 and 1500, 4 times more books were written and printed and distributed than in the whole previous history of mankind. Right? So suddenly, the availability of a printed book became massively, massively more common than before. The ability for you to own a book went from being the super elite of society to anybody that was basically middle class could own a book, right? At the same time, what happened in that same 50 years? If you're a Westerner, a European, they'd never heard of the Americas until 1492.
Yeah.
Right? That same decade, they figured out how to get to India and China better, right? In that period, the cost of pepper in Western Europe was reduced by 90%. Reduced by 90% for what we think of a very common condiment. If you're an Indian background, of course, cost nothing, right? In Europe, it was worth more than gold. And within 50 years, it went down by 90% in cost. The changes in that half century have never been matched in mankind's history, in terms of the dynamic changes in so many technologies, in so many discovery, the way the world was seen, talked about, shaped, so many philosophies that we now think of as normal took place then. And then on top of that, you had a whole bunch of things like culture, literature changes, the Renaissance. That was the peak of the European Renaissance. So art, design, science boomed, right? So again, if you have to study history in your category, if you're selling washing powder, study the history. There was a speaker yesterday, I won't say who it was, but his case study was about toothpaste. I happened to have lunch with him afterwards. I talked to him about toothpaste. And he sat there and went, how come you know so much more about toothpaste than I do, right? And I was talking about the history of toothpaste, why you brush your teeth, where the different ways you brush your teeth came from, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Because you study stuff. Market researcher's number one job is to study. Did you sit through, there was a guy yesterday afternoon from the Philippines who talked about regulations and the way in which government regulations work.
Track one?
Yes.
I probably missed it.
And
I know somebody was there from India talking about AI governments.
Yeah, well, he was talking about innovation, but he was talking about innovation in the terms of he is an innovator. He built a very innovative business about bamboo toothbrushes, weirdly. But more importantly, the president of the Philippines had put him in charge of a commission to look at how to speed up innovation. But what he was really doing was looking at government regulations. His point really was, in one line, was we can talk all we like about doing market research, but as a market researcher, do you actually study the regulations that define how a category can and can't work in a country? Because you should spend most of your time on doing that, right? Yeah. Or how to change the regulation, right? Mm-hmm. So that was probably the most eye-opening presentation of the two days, right? Every category I've ever worked on, did I really understand why the regulations were there, how they work, how you could change, and what the dynamics of them was? I should do more homework. Do more homework, buddy. Always do more homework.
And that brings us to the conversation at the end of it. But again, having a conversation with Dave doesn't end anywhere. It's an endless conversation. So I might have more and more questions, but we cannot go that far. But one question I still would ask Dave from you before we end the session. Most of those people who are like very prone in doing chat GPTs and using AI for their research, and predominantly I'm talking about the young research, coming from those 40 years of experience, reading so many books, giving so many analogies, you're a great storyteller, and every aspect of your life has some story around it. So
every aspect of your life has a story.
Yes. But since I've been hearing from you, so I'll probably, make you my guru right now. So if I really need a suggestion as me being a young researcher and the people who are going to hear us out, what is that one suggestion you wanted to give it to us, considering that, this is 2026, things are going to be changed. And you rightly say, I cannot say that in the next 10 years, technology will remain the same. It will definitely change, probably change in the next couple of years itself.
Probably next week.
Yes. So what is that one advice we take away from Dave? Context.
Think more about context, history, the way society actually works, who are the people that you're really trying to reach, what do they consume, when do they consume, but what do they do for the other 99% of their life, right? More important for you to sit here and us talk about other stuff than to talk about market research. More, or the category that you're trying to, get inside in. Because the truth is that people don't buy products because of functional facts. People buy products, they use brands, they do everything in life. Every decision in life is based on emotion, right? So dig deep on the context of the emotion that drives people. And that's the most important thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. That's very enlightening. I think I'm taking away a lot of context from here. It's just not one thing that I can simply digest. And for me, I'm sure there's a lot that I can actually extract out of it. Every single story from this whole 1 hour of conversation that we had, I tend to find 15 seconds too many in this case. So thank you for giving us your time and, telling
Mate,
us.
it's always a great joy. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for asking me. It's great.
Thank you. So as we come along to the close of this conversation, one thing becomes clear. The future of market research isn't being decided by faster tools or smarter algorithms alone. It's being shaped by how well we understand people, how deeply we listen to the culture, and how responsibly we interpret meaning. What today's discussion reminded us is that the progress doesn't erase the past, it builds on it. The fundamentals of the curiosity, context, and critical thinking still matters. What's changing is the scale, the speed, and the responsibility that comes with it. Asia continues to be a powerful lens for this evolution, but not because it's different, but because it's ahead. And voices like Dave's help us slow down just enough to see where the real signals are. And Dave, thank you for sharing your perspective, not just insights, through decades of observing, questioning, and shaping this industry. Thank you so much. And to everyone listening or watching, if this conversation made you pause, rethink, or look at your work a little differently, then it is doing exactly what a good research and a good storytelling should do. This is the Collaborative Canvas podcast, where experience meets inquiry and where insights evolves into meaning. Thank you so much for watching, and do subscribe the channel. Thank you.